Hello and welcome to this webinar on open banking for businesses and corporates. Open banking is an exciting area and it's been given a lot of airtime, but the potential for business to business or B2B use cases hasn't really been realized. That's what we'll be talking about today. First of all, we'll start by looking at the current environment and discuss what's going on right now. Then we'll talk about the opportunities of B2B open banking, and we'll discuss what needs to be done to realize the benefits. And then we'll take a look at the art of the possible and what could happen in the future, what the future could look like. We've got a wonderful lineup today. We've got 4 excellent speakers. I'm very excited to hear what they've got to say. They'll introduce themselves in a moment. So thank you to the speakers. And thank you also to Ponto, who have sponsored this webinar. They're a key part of the open banking ecosystem, so it's really great to have them here. And for you, the audience watching this live, we want you to get involved as much as possible. We want this to be interactive. So please send in your questions for the speakers. You should see the Q&A box in your viewing console, so you can type in your questions there. Keep your questions short and simple, please. And the earlier you send in the question, the better. We won't wait until the end for the questions. We'll do them as we go. So the sooner you send in the question, the more likely it is that we'll get to it. So let's get on with it and do the introductions. So we'll do name, job title, brief description of what we do, who we are. So I'll go first. My name is Jane Cooper. I'm a financial journalist and I specialize in banking and technology. I do a lot of reading and writing, and I also moderate Finextra webinars. Right, so who's going to go first? Mark, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jane, for hosting this. I'm the domain lead of payments at Isabel Group, of which Ponto is a part. And I've been in payments, well, forever. Once I graduated from Erasmus University, the first thing I said, I'm never going to work at a bank. And then I applied with IBM, became an IBM consultant. And I think my second assignment was at Fortis Bank, doing SEPA implementation. And I basically never left. So I worked at market infrastructures. I used to be responsible for instant payments at Worldline. I worked for central banks, I worked for commercial banks, and lately I've also started working a bit at, I guess, the front end of payments. So I did a stint with Visma, in accounting, one of the largest accounting firms. Jurgen will probably tell a bit about that. And I'm currently engaged with Isabel Group, which we proudly say we're the oldest and biggest fintech of Belgium. But I'll talk a little bit more about Isabel later.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. And Michael, tell us about yourself. Who are you?
Thank you, Jane. Yes, my name is Michael Salmony. I'm an independent consultant on payment innovations, everything in this weird and wonderful world that we're now creating, using technology to make payments better. I have a lot of common things with Mark. I also spent a good time at Worldline, helping to build it up to become the largest payment provider in Europe, 3rd largest in the world, before leaving for an independent career. Before that, I worked at a central bank in Germany, which had about 1/3 of the German market. That's where I learned about banking, because before that I was actually at IBM, which then was the largest IT company in the world, and doing business transformation for media, for online ticketing, for 100 other things, everything except banking. And before that, I did computer science at Cambridge, so that's quite useful now when people come and tell you that blockchain solves everything.
Yes, I've seen it all before, heard it all before. Okay, brilliant. Nick.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jane. So my name is Nick Betheja. I'm the Senior Director of Open Banking at Bank of New York Mellon. Similar to Mark, when I left university, I also said I will not work for banks, but I couldn't resist the front row seat to all the dynamic transformation going on. So I guess here I am. So yeah, previously I was with Citi for a number of years and JP Morgan for a number of years, and landed at BNY about 6 months ago, and a really exciting time for the firm, really trying to retransform or transform themselves into a more modern financial services provider, and happy to be part of it. I think, the simplest way to describe my job is I build the APIs. Right. And, I've been doing that for a couple of years now, and I really enjoy it, and happy to participate in the panel because I think this is going to be a good discussion.
Great. And last but not least, Jürgen.
Thanks, Jane. And hi, everyone. So my name is Jürgen Sils. At the moment, working at Yuki, which is a Visma company. And what is Visma? Well, at Visma, it's like the mother company that has a lot of different financial companies under their wing. And there I am the head of product, so responsible for the product strategy in driving this throughout the different teams in our company. And never in my life would I have thought that I would join an accountancy software firm, but yeah, here I am. Funny how life turns out. And what did I do before? Well, before I was in consulting, and before that I also was studying computer science, although I haven't touched a line of code in 10 years.
Okay, brilliant. So the topic of this webinar is open banking. And before we delve right into it, can we just clarify our definitions? Are we all understood on what open banking is? And do we all have the same understanding? And maybe does someone want to start with a dinner party definition? Imagine you're at a dinner party, you're talking to someone who doesn't know what it is. How would you describe it? Who wants to have a go? Maybe Michael, do you want to go for it?
I'll give it a stab, yeah. I mean, for me, open banking is like the move from the Nokia to the smartphone. The Nokia was a closed environment where the only thing you got on your phone was whatever Nokia had programmed into it. But the beauty of the smartphone, with an app store, is you suddenly unleash the creativity of the third parties. So suddenly millions of people start developing new ideas on top of the phone. And that's what's made the iPhone and the Android so valuable, by adding these extra functions from third parties. And this is now happening with banking. Instead of just getting a mobile app from your bank or an online banking from your bank, you suddenly get millions of new developers, fintechs, coming up with new services on top of a bank. And that for me is the transformational thing about open banking.
Okay, does anyone have any other sort of definitions or anything they would add or say differently?
Or adding to that, banks opening up and being able to have this innovation on top is true. And Michael, you said fintechs. It could even be non-fintechs in my book, if you will. So one of the examples I really like, for example, is Tesla. Tesla is offering insurance. They're not doing that themselves. They're actually integrating with Cover in Belgium or in Europe. They're doing that. So they have the ecosystem, they have the customer, but they integrate using APIs a service that's a financial service in a product that's not primarily a financial product, and that's something that we see enabled by open banking, and I think that's pretty cool. I think so. Having the ability to integrate financial products into non-financial products and services is, to me, what open banking or open finance in the broader sense is all about.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially in my market in the US, where you've seen a plethora of technology companies, e-commerce companies, marketplaces start to really kick the tires and execute a financial services strategy. You look at Apple Pay, you can look across the line, Amazon, all these big companies have been enabled by the advent of API technology and kind of this market creating itself around financial services infrastructure. It's really been fascinating to see in the US, for sure.
And Jürgen, anything to add?
No, yeah, it's funny what Mark already said, that you really notice softwares. Like I said, I'm working in the mostly financial and accounting software, but it used to be more like just getting transactions was the only thing we could do. And now open banking opened so many possibilities, and you see many companies in and outside Visma, entering this space.
Okay, brilliant. So let's sort of paint a picture of what it looks like at the moment. So, Michael, people have been talking about open banking for a long time. So, Michael, can you sort of just bring everybody up to speed and maybe paint a picture, or maybe I'll ask, how would you characterize the current state of open banking and where everybody's at? And then how does that relate to B2B or corporate use cases? How would you sort of describe what's going on at the moment?
Yeah, there's quite a lot in there, but let me try and cover that.
Massive question.
I mean, open banking isn't a new phenomenon. It's actually been around for about 20 years. There have been some who've been doing it long before Europe issued its PSD2 law, which formalized that. But it has now conquered the world, and this is something that I benefit from. I go into the Middle East. I've just come back from Japan yesterday, where we did a big event with the Bank of Japan. It's Latin America, Africa, absolutely everywhere is adopting open banking, a thing that we invented in Europe. And I was actually a little bit a part of that with the European Commission and the European Parliament. So I think that's something we can be proud of. Usually we import things from California or from China. And this is something that was created in Europe, which is exported around the world. So I think that's pretty good. And everybody's doing it with different success and a different speed. The UK is doing quite well, I think, in that space. But there are some other regions who are also really driving this ahead. In the US, famously with less regulation, more market-driven. Some are doing it in a more regulated way. But although everybody has slightly different approaches, some do it more for the data, some do it more for the payments, some do. Everybody has their own flavor. This is a huge transformative thing that is absolutely sweeping the world. And one thing that is really exciting now is that there's an increased focus on B2B. And this is really the intersection of my two favorite topics, open banking and B2B, that we're covering here today. Because I think the discussion in the past has been far too much on consumer stuff. I mean, obviously, it's always good for the consumer that he can pay more efficiently and has more options. But the real money is in B2B. And I'll be very happy to drill more down into that, why I think that particular B2B angle is actually more significant. And we're glad that we're going into this topic now.
Okay, brilliant. Nick, you're in the US, right? That's yeah. So and you work for an American bank. So can you sort of give us a sense of the perspective you've got on open banking, just being in a different market?
Yeah, of course. So I think, and I agree with what Michael just said about the implementation, right? So in the US, you've had this sort of explosion in private market funding, right? And a lot of that funding flowed into, startups at the infrastructure layer, right? So banking as a service, embedded banking, enabling type companies. And so, as we talked about before, this enabled organizations, e-commerce, marketplaces, technology companies to really, or they had a huge barrier removed from the fact that they can now partner and buy to realize their aspirations in financial services versus having to build it and actually hire and retain SME knowledge, right? So the perception here is that in the EU and the UK, although directives, PSD2, PSD3, other open banking directives have been positive, they've been slow to implement, right? And that's our perception here. So I agree 100% with the comment of, in the US, the boundaries of open banking have really been found through market-driven practices, versus in Europe and in other places, I think there's still this kind of waiting to see how the regulators and how the government bodies define those boundaries, so that then you can have actually those players into the sandbox and see sort of this explosion of growth. So I definitely agree market-driven practices in the US have been the driving force, whereas I think maybe in Europe and other places, there's still this kind of waiting to see how the regulators define the boundaries of open banking. Yeah.
Okay, so let's take it back to Europe then, Mark. So can you bring us up to speed or sort of give us an update on the regulatory landscape and PSD3, what's happening, and sort of what kind of impact do you expect to see?
Yeah. So touching upon Nick's comment that open banking has been rather slow. Depends a bit on, of course, from which viewpoint you take. I kind of agree, although at Ponto, so we're an open banking enabler, so we're connecting banks to these fintechs and these third-party applications. We started on this journey in 2019, and we've consistently seen a 30 to 40% growth year over year. So starting from zero, that's of course quite easy in the first couple of years, but as you move into the fifth or the sixth year of doing this, actually still doing a 30-40% growth is quite significant, right? So this is every year we're adding like 30, 40, 50,000 additional companies that connect their bookkeeping, that connect their invoicing solution, that connect their cash flow management to their banking. They're doing payments. We've got one of the companies, one of our customers, who's doing this in the petrol industry, who's literally moving hundreds of millions of euros through open banking. So it is, I guess, slow in terms of adoption, but it is like this freight train that's on the route.
Yeah, I would say like the perception on this side of the Atlantic is that it is slow because you read in Finextra and other publications, right? About delays with the banks implementing against a certain timeline, and so that's kind of the news feed you get on this side. But I guess my question was, would that happen anyway, right? You talked about this explosion about the banking and fintech. And Jane, I know, I'm sorry, I'm taking over and asking Mark a question. I apologize, but would that have happened anyway, you think, in terms of that market finding itself in Europe versus having to be direct?
Yeah. So funny thing is, I am Dutch. But I've been living in Belgium, and Isabel is originally a Belgian company. We've been doing a multi-banking solution for over 20 years now. So we're connecting the Belgian banks to their corporates and their accountants way before there was open banking. So the solutions in some of the jurisdictions were already there. What open banking brought was reach and standardization, which really accelerated that process. Yes, we had, of course, the use case and the demand from the customer or the corporate to connect their accounting software to their bank account, and having this automated feed and not having to log in and download a file and then save it on your computer locally with all the security hassle. Of course, that demand has been there for a long time, but now you're actually able to offer a solution that works across Europe using open banking. And to come a bit back to the question that Jane was asking, so if you look ahead into the next couple of years and you look what's going to happen, so what we've seen at Ponto is when we started in 2019, the APIs were unstable. They were all over the place in terms of content. The UX that the customer had to go through to get access to the bank account and get that authorization in place was terrible. It worked for the very simple use case where you had a consumer who wanted to do personal finance management, but the moment you had to have dual signatures and it was a corporate with a procuration scheme in place, it started to break down. Well, that has stabilized and has started to work now. And so we've kind of got the basics in place. Is my feeling right now, and that has, of course, has facilitated that growth. Well, looking ahead, we're now working on PSD3, which is going to enable the multilateral scheme approach. So it's going to enable premium APIs, and that's going to broaden the scope, not only having the same services on different sources. So I'm able to not only get the account information on my payments account, but now I'm also able to connect my savings account and my investment account and my account at the PSP that's doing the web payments for me if I'm running a web shop. So it's going to enable more sources, but it's also going to improve the services that are existing today. So you're going to have payments with a guarantee. You're going to have variable recurring payments. So that's going to open up a lot more use cases. And because it comes with this remuneration model for the banks, it creates a win-win situation, which may have not been into place yet. So I'm pretty excited on that front.
And Jürgen, what about you? Is there anything else you want to add about the difference open banking has made, or what the impact of PSD3 is likely to be?
Yeah, so to make a comparison to in our company, how it used to be. Well, in Belgium, we were indeed lucky to have a company like Isabel who connected with all the banks, and we only had to connect to one supplier, and they could give us everything in a centralized way. But that doesn't exist for all countries. Mark, for example, said the Netherlands. So what is then, was it a challenge before? We had to develop integrations with all those different banks separately, if they even had an API that they allow to access for other B2B software. And well, all in all, you can build these integrations, which often is quite a lengthy and time-consuming business. Well, and Mark already said, they can have different flavors there. Now, and then I'm not even mentioning the maintenance. Sometimes they go to a newer version of the API, etc., and you have to build all over. And actually, that's a lot of, well, I wouldn't say a wasted time, but resources you don't like to spend. You won't like to spend many development resources on this. Now, where we see these big opportunities with PSD2 or PSD3. Yeah, suddenly everything becomes more centralized, everything becomes open, and then with some companies, then we suddenly have let's say all the bankings are now suddenly offered to us. And that's great for especially accounting software, because the more data the accounting software gets in, the more real-time and correct data gets in an automated way, the more up-to-date the financial, let's say, the financial health there is of all these companies, and makes bookkeeping so much more easier.
Okay, brilliant. So then let's move into let's talk about the opportunities of open banking for business to business use cases. So Michael, I'll go to you if you're still okay after your flight from Japan and your jet lag, if you're still with us in spirit, physically and in spirit. And Michael, you said that you love open banking and B2B, your sort of two favorite things. So this is where the two collide. What opportunities are there, and where are the greatest opportunities, and what are you most excited about?
Well, the opportunities are not sort of very sexy, quite honestly, right? In the consumer space, people talk about sort of what's going to happen in the metaverse with my wearables and with crypto and whatever. That's all fun to talk about, and that's why it covers a lot of conferences, a lot of media. But the business is actually in the mundane things of doing invoicing and cash prediction and liquidity management and a reconciliation of invoices and, all these very boring, very unsexy topics, but which corporates really need help with. And not only the large corporates, it's also the SMEs. Something that is often forgotten is that most economies consist over 90% of SMEs. The large corporates have already got lots of API connections with their banks and do automated FX and futures and trades and invoices and financing and corporate loans and everything. But the SMEs, which is 90% of the market in almost everywhere in the world, are completely left behind here because they are not really digitally savvy. They have other things to do. They don't have a huge treasury software and ERP. So this is a huge opportunity for open banking with the APIification, with access to data, to allow also SMEs to suddenly become much more digitally forward, and have automated processes in there. Some people call this the democratization of digital finance, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it basically means everybody suddenly has access to modern financial means. And that is that is absolutely enormous. And that's why I think this combination of B2B and open banking and the APIification and all that means is so significant.
So let me ask a follow-up question that someone from the audience, there's a comment and a question. So maybe, Michael, you want to tackle it first, and then the others if you also want to respond. So let me read it out. APIs require the corporation to have a skilled IT staff to make use of the data access. If we speak of B2B, over 80% are SMEs with very limited IT staff. Question: how do we make open banking viable for SMEs? So maybe, well, Michael, do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the beauty of things like PSD2, where these things are becoming standardized. You know, if every SME has to work out its own way of connecting to the 5 banks it banks with in maybe 3 different countries, then that's going to start getting complicated. But PSD2 has mandated standards. There are people like Berlin Group. There are now API aggregators. So it's getting increasingly simple to connect via one single point to all the banks in Europe, all the 4,000 banks. It doesn't quite work perfectly yet, but we're getting there, right? So once you have this standardization, then things like software packages like Xero and QuickBooks, etc., which SMEs use, can plug into that and automate their whole processes without really doing anything. They just get a new version of their accountancy software, and then suddenly they can do better invoicing and get better financing, get access to new loans, see what their cash flow is going to be next week and next month, and has huge advantages. So you mustn't think of people in SMEs programming stuff and programming to APIs. There are software packages and aggregators and integrators doing that. And of course, Isabel is a notable example of shown in Belgium how to integrate corporates of any size across a whole geography. So there are very smart organizations helping to organize this scene.
So yeah, Mark, do you want to respond to that audience question as well about how we make it viable for SMEs?
Yeah. So there are basically 2 routes, right? The one route is through Jürgen. So SMEs make use of open banking through solutions like those provided by Jürgen and his team. They use Yuki. Yuki uses open banking, and that enables the new use case, as Michael is saying. We're the aggregator, and we also expose an API that can be used directly by the customer. And as rightly stated, that's only used by companies who actually have an IT department who are able to implement that API, which are the larger companies. If you look at the SMEs, what we also have done is we've integrated with low-code and no-code platforms like Zapier. So what you can also do is if you don't have the actual development capability yourself, but you're able to basically formulate an if-then-else statement, you can actually go into a low-code or no-code platform like Zapier, connect it through your bank account using open banking, and then say, whenever there's an incoming payment, I want my Philips Hue lamp to turn green. And you can do that. That's something that we enable today. So it's also through those types of platforms that you're able to capture the value that's open banking.
And Jürgen, do you have anything else to add?
No. So maybe even what Michael or Mark said, to give a real practical example, what is often the biggest worries of all these small companies? Mostly it's figuring out, are my invoices paid? You wouldn't believe how many companies have huge issues just figuring out, is it paid, following up on that. And indeed, that's the beauty now with the open banking. You can create automation with that. We just get almost real time, 4 hours later after a transaction has been made, we just already get the data in the system. It can be Yuki or QuickBooks or whatever. We get the data in, and the company owner or even the accountant, depends who follows up on it, they can immediately, we can match it to an invoice and see, hey, entrepreneur, those invoices are paid and those are done, but those aren't. And yeah, I should maybe do a study how many hours we save entrepreneurs with this, but I can tell you it's huge. I think many Sundays can now be spent with families instead that they're going through their unpaid invoices.
I can actually add a bit of color to that. I was part of the European Commission expert group on e-invoicing, where we discovered that there are 57 billion pieces of paper that we send around Europe every year, just bits that are printed out by one computer, sent to the incoming department of another, who then types it into their computer to pay the bill with all the errors and delays involved in that. And there are many companies who run their treasury on Excel, even today. Yep. Even large companies do that. So if you start getting into a new world where this is all more automated and the reconciliation happens immediately and without errors, yeah, I think you can probably see that. And just to add one more concrete example, if you look at IATA Pay, that is just paying for your airline bills for the business traveler using open banking. This was started with IATA, who's the Worldwide Airline Association, said it should be possible in future not to type in your credit card with a 16-digit and CCV and all this 1970s technology, but just to click on and say, I'm going to pay directly from my bank. And that would save business travelers $8 billion in card fees a year. So that's just another one simple example of the advantages of this automation and connection and open banking.
Yeah, brilliant. So we've talked about the SMEs. Maybe Nick, you can sort of take us to the sort of the larger end. So you're dealing with large.
Just to answer the question, yeah, and further to Jürgen's point, you know, there's historically restaurants in the U.S. and I think in many countries have traditionally closed on Monday. And the question was, why were they always closed on Monday? Well, it's actually to do bookkeeping, right? And think about the automation that, you know, is available to them now, where they can actually open on Mondays and start to gain more revenue. So that's interesting there. Look, I'm very much a believer in low code, no code, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I think there's this myth that even the larger companies, they have all the engineering talent, they can plug in APIs at will. I mean, speaking quite frankly, I talk to a lot of large corporations, a lot of large organizations across the spectrum when you talk about industries. And, you know, we advise sometimes, well, maybe an API route is not the best because you don't have the talent, right? Because you're asking questions, you know, reading our documentation and asking questions where if you did have the talent there, the engineering talent, this would be quite simple, right? And so what we found is some of these larger corporations are very architect heavy. You know, they can write in COBOL, you know, they can, you know, do process maps all day long, right? But then there's the engineering talent that's really required to integrate with the APIs. So I don't think it's just an SME problem. I think the world needs more software engineers, full stack software engineers, and I'll say that, you know, quite frankly, I think that's what the world needs. Low code, no code, I'm a huge proponent of. I think we talked about democratization of financial services. This is the democratization of software development, right? Low code, no code, making it configurable, and we're even looking at. And I'll say the dreaded acronym for the first time today, but we're even looking at AI, right? So, you know, layering natural language processing on top of our API documentation, right? And actually make executing a transaction a sort of a natural language prompt, right? So again, we're trying to, you know, push the boundaries when it comes to democratizing not only financial services, but the code required to execute transactions across it. And so, yeah, I mean, that's just answering the last question. Sorry, Jane. Was there a follow-up as well?
Yeah, and also we've had a question from the audience about the use of Excel. So with large organizations, why are they still using Excel and archaic solutions? And the question says, is it that organizations still do not trust data going out into the open?
So, you know, I look at a particular use case, right? Cash flow forecasting, right? So we talk about, you know, third parties that are catering themselves to SMEs all the way up to multi-billion-dollar corporates, right? And they provide the slick visuals and all the data in and data out to forecast your cash out 12 months, 18 months, right? But then you had organizations, right? And again, I'm talking about, you know, conversation I've actually had where, great, now I don't need 75 key fobs to log into my online banking portal, right, to pull all that information. All that information is aggregated and comes to me once across my banking partners. but I still want to do the cash flow forecasting. I still want to do that in-house, right? So give me all the data, give me, all the, the reporting data across my 5 or 6 banks or however many you have, but I still want to perform the actual action of forecasting my cash. That's kind of where we're seeing Excel play into this. So that this open banking world is, having a plugin, being able to leverage API technology to bring in all the data, but then actually having the subject matter experts at the company perform things such as cash flow forecasting. Right?
Okay. Does anyone have any comments they want to make or say before I move on to the next question? Just giving everyone an opportunity to speak if they want to. No, if not, okay, I'm going to go on to maybe Michael, you can handle this one. This is about the airline ticket example. So when we're talking about the use cases with open banking, still things are very slow to happen. So using the example quoted, the airline tickets, for example, why do you feel like the airline industry has not implemented? Why isn't more happening more quickly with these things, with these use cases?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we can all be a bit impatient in that. But I remember in my IBM days, we tried to convince the airline industry to get rid of those paper tickets with carbon copies. And they said that would be absolutely impossible because in the law, and we've always done it this way. And it took 10 years to them to actually do online ticketing where you, and also for customers to trust that if I get this 6XNLP and turn up at an airport, you can actually board your airplane. So all these things, sort of customer habits, corporate processes, need to be changed, but I think it is accelerating now. And one thing that wasn't mentioned about PSD3 and PSR is this will now be enforced. This is something we didn't have in Europe before. It was sort of, the banks had an obligation to open the APIs, but quite a lot of the national competent authorities, can I say, weren't too bothered if it worked well or not. Whereas this is going to change now. I recently did an interview with Eric du Colombier, who's the head of the European Commission on PSD2. So anybody interested in that can see the full text. They are really serious about saying all banks have to open up with APIs. They have to be in good quality. They have to be documented. They have to be performant, which hasn't been the case. And until these APIs work properly, the whole construct on top of this will not work, right? Because if you have a bad experience once or twice, because every third bank didn't work properly, then people are going to abort. So once you fix these basics at the bottom, like, for example, functioning APIs, being able to access all accounts, then this thing will obviously take off because it is so hugely advantageous for corporates, for SMEs, for private consumers, for paying, for using data, for digitization. There is no way anybody's going to stop this development. Nobody's going to go back to the Nokia phone. Everybody now wants a smartphone.
Okay, so we're on a freight train to the smart era. So maybe Jürgen or Mark, can you, with this, I wanted to ask this as well, and we have a audience member who asked, what are the key challenges with open banking for B2B today? So what are the biggest sort of impediments to getting to where we want to be? Maybe Mark, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, the fact that there are obstacles is basically our raison d'etre, right? We're at Ponto, we're trying to solve these obstacles on behalf of our customers. The fact that banks have different APIs and have different flavors and have different onboarding and authorization schemes, that allows us to play that role in harmonization. It is maybe not always as bad as everybody makes it out to. So we have over 2,000 banks connected. We have got 80 plugins. So with 80 different connectors, we're able to cover the 2,000 banks. So it's not like 2,000 banks means 2,000 different APIs. It's actually more like 80. What I said earlier as well, we see these APIs improving. So we've been doing this for a couple of years now. These APIs have started to stabilize, especially at those banks who are catching more of the volume. There are 4 big banks in Belgium. There are 3-4 big banks in the Netherlands. There are a couple of big banks in France. Those banks they have stable APIs. They've improved their UX. If you look at initiating a payment at a bank like ING, if you compare that with Ideal versus open banking actually has a better UX than Ideal at the moment. So that has improved. That said, there's still a couple of challenges to cover a lot of these use cases. So if you look at what we're getting as requests, the 2 main requests are PSP data and credit card data. So if you're a company and you want to fully automate your bookkeeping and you want to solve the Yuki case that like Jurgen is doing, having access to your bank accounts, to your payments account, that works very, very well. That's fine. But then you see this single transaction, the single credit coming in from parties like Adyen or Global Collect saying, these are your sales of the last week. And by the way, I've already deducted my fees from that global credit. So there's no way to link that global credit to the sales that you have in your administration. So you need the details, and those are present at Adyen or Global Collect. So getting that data to be able to feed that into your reconciliation is key for these type of companies. So that's, I guess, our number 1 ask. The second one is credit card data. So to do expense management. So getting a credit card data feed to be able to fully reconcile those transactions. Those are the 2 biggest things.
Yeah, and Jurgen, what about you? What kind of challenges are you seeing?
Well, it's funny you ask for challenges because, like Mark said, I see only mostly a decrease in challenges thanks to this. Like I said, I will again touch the maintenance. Maintenance is a huge part of every software company, just keeping everything up to date, and that I see decreasing, which makes me really happy because now you have time to solve other user needs, customer needs. Then so many have been mentioned here before, so I don't think I need to repeat them because thanks to all this data, good data that comes in, you can offer also much more tailored advice to all these customers through a middleman or directly in the software. And another biggest opportunity I also see, or big opportunity is also increase in security. Because this security and fraud detection, because that's something we also see more and more, and it is now because of the open banking, I don't know, but you see more frauds also happening with invoices in the B2B market. You sometimes hear about it that a company gets a mail and they say, this is our new IBAN number, and well, it wasn't, but they just fill it into the system. And next time an invoice is paid, it goes to this, I guess, somewhere in the Bahamas, an account. And now this is where I see the biggest advantage of PSD3 then also. And also for those end-with payments.
Okay, great. So I want to shift direction in a moment to the art of the possible and the future and how we can open our minds. And before I do that, I have a quick audience question for Michael. Maybe you can tackle this, maybe not. We'll see how we go. Is there anything missing in the law? For example, consumer rights. Do you think could anything be added to what has been laid down?
I mean, it's a work in progress, right? We've got PSD2, now we've got PSD3, and there probably will be further, so there will be bits added on. The thing that's missing for me most is the governance. We need a strong governance across PSD2 to make sure this works, that things are updated when it's necessary, to fix problems when they're created. The UK did that very well, right? They set up under the competition authority thing that was quite expensive for the banks. One could discuss about that, but they had a sort of central governance which really drove this topic forward. That's a bit difficult in Europe, where we have 27 independent member states and lots of different regulators and everything. But I think that needs to be the next step, that we need a proper governance, because the other bits are coming together. The APIs, the technical stuff, schemes are starting to emerge. There are sort of commercial incentives being set up. There are lots of business models which are super convincing. So I think that's all on a good road, but we still lack a governance. So if you ask what's the one thing that is missing, I would point to that.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so with a lot of the use cases, it seems that we're talking about things that are happening now anyway, and there's problems, and now open banking gives us a better way of doing things that we're already doing. So now, Nick, I want to ask you a question. Can you just sort of, explode our brains a little bit for us, and give us a sense of a sort of mindset shift about what is possible with open banking? Maybe you could sort of allude to new sort of business models, or even things like crypto and digital assets. Like what could be possible in the future?
Yeah, I think there's, the way that I look at it in the future, and the way that I define the future, is that anyone, a business or an individual, can access a financial product at the time of need, right? I mean, that's kind of how I define the overall landscape. I read a blog post about a couple of years ago from a fellow named Ben Milne, who was the ex-CEO and chairman of Dwolla, right, payments company in the U.S. And he talked about, and blew my mind, so I'm going to, kind of relay that over, about this concept of a transfer type and a value type, right? And, for an API designer, or my inner API designer and me, that has always been portrayed as like currency and rail, right? Do you want to send a wire in euros, right? But, kind of opening, that small little change kind of opens the world up to really think about what else can be exchanged, what else can be cleared through the same pipes, right? If you think about crypto, yes, crypto, obviously there's a value type, and then there's a transfer type, but other, sort of fungible type of assets out there. And I've always used the example of carbon credits. Energy companies exchange carbon credits all the time. So why can't the same mechanisms be used to do that? And I think asking those questions comes at the right time, because this definition of money that we've always had has been broadening exponentially over the last 5 years. And I look at the future, and I think about the combination of these technologies, NLP, low code, no code, the ability to move any asset and clear any asset through the same pipes. That to me is a broadened definition of open banking, but I think it's something that really is possible with the infrastructure and the guidance that we're using and building today.
So who wants to
a little dreamer in me? I don't know. Yeah, so we'll see.
So Michael, do you have any comments or follow-up thoughts to that?
Well, if we're talking about the future, I mean, for me, it's the API-ification of everything. Everything is going to be connected directly and digitally. At the moment, Telecom Italia, the largest mobile phone provider in Italy, has several hundred people who just do invoice reconciliation. Because when people pay their phone bill, they will write in the free text fields, bill. And is that the September bill or the October bill? Is it the dad paying for the daughter? Has the bill been paid in full? And there are hundreds of people sorting that out manually. This sort of stuff has got to go away, and it will go away as soon as we connect the data directly with APIs, right? And that we're on this journey now. We're starting it in financial services. We're connecting payment accounts. We're connecting the data, the transaction data. And this is now expanding with feeder and open finance to mortgages and insurance and all the other financial services. And that is actually happening across all industries. If you look at what's happening in Australia with the consumer data right, or what's happening with OpenX globally, that we're opening up health and government and education and research. Every data everywhere is being opened up with suitable controls, of course, right? You need to have consent if you want that opened up, and there needs to be protection of all that. But a protected way of opening up data, that is going to lead to a mashup of data across lots of different industries. And we can't even begin to imagine what that's going to mean. We're already sort of trying to get our heads around open banking, which is the beginning of this. It started in financial services, interestingly, which isn't typical, but this is going to encompass all industries. And what that's going to mean, I mean, just one inkling, Uber, you know, we all know Uber, that is actually 4 APIs. That is your location, the driver's location, the map, and a payment. Those 4 things been mashed up to basically create Uber. And if you look how transformational Uber has been, just with mashing up 4 APIs from different industry, from the map industry, from the payment industry, and from the telecom location industry, you can get an inkling of what this is going to mean when all industries are opened up, connected digitally, and mashed up together to provide new services. That, for me, is the future.
Mark, do you have any comments on what the future looks like?
Well, how can I top that, right?
Yeah.
You know,
it's quite hard.
This is like, look, there's this famous saying that says we overestimate short-term change and we underestimate long-term change. So if I look at Ponto, as I say, we're growing 30-40%, which is significant but not groundbreaking, right? Which means we'll in the next 3 years we'll basically double in size. We'll have the first premium APIs. That's going to be, I guess, a little bit more of the same. But if you look indeed in that 10-year horizon, and we have FIDA with APIs for insurance and loans and investments, we have mandated instant payments in Europe, which means that payments will be instant. We might have CBDC, central bank digital currency. The way we interact with our financial services is going to be massively different. I fully agree with Michael.
And Jürgen, anything to add? Any further comments? Can you top that?
Definitely going to top that, but to add to that, yeah, it's a bit, what is the result of everything that's open? And I think everything will become much more time efficient. Many things will be automated. Mark mentioned it, like payments, and I think in combination with, let's say, open regulation in at different sectors. For example, open regulation in invoices. There's also a bit the same thing happening with Peppol, for example. And when all these data become available through APIs, then we will see, I think, an enormous boost in automation and time saving for private persons, but especially companies.
Yep.
And that's what everyone wants.
Yeah.
That's why the world needs more software engineers.
So Nick, I was going to ask you, if we've got this brave new world that beckons, there's all these opportunities. If you have a small business owner or maybe a corporate treasurer, given with all that in mind, what sort of advice would you give to them to sort of think more strategically about what is possible?
Yeah, I think, I mean, let's just take SMEs, for example. I think, there are companies out there today that, are directly, at least in the US, directly catering to the pain points that SMEs have, right? So the question that I always, if I had owned a business and was looking at my operations, the question I'd always be asking myself would be, how do I become more strategic? How do I spend less time on operational activities, and how do I spend more time trying to grow my business, right? And I think all of what we've talked about, especially in terms of the last couple of minutes on the art of the possible, is really to to what Jürgen said, finding time, finding efficiencies so that you can become, a little bit more of a dreamer when it comes to your own business in terms of where do you want to go, and not have to always kind of put out fires in terms of operational, inefficiencies, right? So, in terms of, how I look at the opportunity, if I were to own a business, that's kind of what, I would be wanting, right, in the next couple of years.
Yeah. Does anyone have anything to add to that? We're going to have to start wrapping up soon. Any final thoughts or? Okay, right, so let's sort of start to wrap up then. So I'm going to go around each of you and sort of give you about a minute each, about a minute, if you've got your stopwatch ready. Let's have a final closing comment or a closing remark. So this is an opportunity to either summarize the discussion or to leave the audience with a final thought or comment. Okay, so maybe Jürgen, would you like to go first? Final thoughts and comments
why not?
from you.
Final thoughts. Well, I don't think I can add anything new, but maybe to give like a summary what I think will happen the most, especially in the sector we are in. Like I said, this enhanced data access and integrations will really help businesses access real-time financial data. And this will give them much more, help them in their services. They can be more proactive, make better decisions because the data is just better and more accurate. And that I think will have the biggest boost for many businesses to grow. And in combination with the time saving and the automation, I think that we see a pretty big impact there.
Okay, brilliant. And Nick, how about a final thought and closing comment from you?
Yeah, I'd be probably less than a minute, but to summarize, the potential of open banking across the B2B landscape is huge. Everything I think is moving in the right direction. If we talk about democratization of financial services, the proliferation of API technology, other market-driven and government-driven directives and practices as well, right, is really opened up the box for that disruption to flow upwards into SMEs and B2Bs. I think, there are challenges. Personally, I look at the challenge from an API designer perspective of, interface standardization. I think you have all these international bodies out there, SWIFT, there's ISO standards. And I think as businesses become more and more complex, they end up being swallowed up into that world. And I think time will tell if all of those kind of B2B payment standards come together in a more adoptable and customer-friendly sort of manner. But it's definitely headed in the right direction. And I think, again, things don't move linear in our space. They move exponential. And I think in the next couple of years, you're going to see, a brave new world for corporate treasurers and the small business owners in terms of, freeing up their time to make more strategic decisions.
Okay, brilliant. Michael, final thoughts from you?
Well, much has already been said, but maybe the only thing to conclude with, from my point of view, maybe a little bit of a global view, because this is, for me, quite exciting how this topic is happening all over the world now, in Australia, in Africa, in the Middle East. There's a massive competition in the Middle East. If Bahrain is doing something, that the Saudis need to get a move on, and then the UAE wants to top that. And so we're having a massive global competition. Who can be the best in this space? So I hope that Europe, who invented this, will not get left behind, will be amongst the leaders. Because this is going to be a race to a really completely new world. And I think it's going to be a lot better than what we had before. And I hope Europe, who started it, will win it.
Brilliant. Okay, and last but not least, Mark, final thought and closing comment from you.
I won't fall into repetition, so I'll leave you with the comment that we've talked quite a lot about what is going to happen and future developments and what are the use case that we're seeing in the future. I just want to leave out there that a lot of very, very cool stuff is already possible today. And I'll give you one final example to let you also go home. Is we have one of our customers is using open banking in the corporate financing space. So if you look at the traditional way of applying for a corporate financing or factoring or a loan, you would go to your bank, you would have 3 years of annual statements on paper, who have to be looked at by an account manager or a risk assessor. What they do is they take 13 months worth of transaction data from your payment account, and they basically reconstruct a kind of cash flow statement based on that, which gives them a lot more detailed information on the risk profile of their customer. It gives, for example, information on the concentration of revenue, whether there are seasonal effects in revenue, whether there are late payments on the account, which indicates some kind of payment behavior. So there's a lot more data in the actual transactions than they would have gotten through 3 years of annual statements. And they're able to do a factoring solution in 5 minutes instead of 3 weeks, which is the standard time for a bank. Those kind of use cases, they're possible today with what I guess is basic open banking that exists today. So there's a lot to come, but there's also a lot possible already today. So if anyone in the audience is actually looking at this open bank thing that looks kind of interesting, think about the use case. Think about what you can do already and implement that in a way today.
Okay, brilliant. Another good example of a use case. Okay, so we'll have to leave it there. So thank you to the speakers. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Nick. And thank you, Jürgen. Thank you to the audience for watching. Thank you, Ponto, for sponsoring. And thank you to Finextra and the team that put this all together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.